Right then, well, it's nice to meet you, Pauline, and thanks for taking time out. And Gabs, thanks very much for taking time out. I've prepared these questions predominantly aimed towards Pauline. I'm sorry about that, because I didn't realise, I thought the interview was just for myself. But,
then you've an added thing, haven't
yes,
you?
and I just
what I do, Gaps does.
Yes. Yes, please do. If I can just get your book out of the way first.
Yeah, sure.
Are you pleased with the amount of sales that it's achieved so far?
Yeah, over the moon. You know, I mean, it's kind of, it wasn't so much that. I've always thought that, you know, if you're going to do something, you're going to look at your past or whatever, sort of own your past.
Yes.
You know, own your history and tell it as truthfully as what you can. And yeah, it's been really good. I mean, it's the second edition now, so there's an added chapter which goes into how things have been really since Gaps came, you know, but we got back together again, and this whole incarnation of the Selector that's going on now. So that's been going on for 3 years, so, and I thought it was important to deal with that, which is twice as long really as the original band.
Right. When you written your autobiography, did you hope that it would reach a further audience than just the hardcore Selector stroke ska?
Oh, well, I wonder actually how many sort of Selector stroke ska people it actually has kind of filtered through to. I think a lot of people know the work that I've done over the years, because I mean, you know, some of it's been with the Selector, but I've done other things as well. So, I mean, it can draw from a lot of different people, but they all come in, and obviously they find the Selector through that way as well, which helps.
Yes.
And so yeah, it's I think it's good. It's like having a calling card. You know what I mean?
Just stay on the book for a moment. What was the inspiration to sort of kickstart you into actually sitting down and saying, right, I am going to do this now?
Right, well, a guy called Tony McMahon rang me up, and he was ghostwriting Neville Staples' book.
Right.
And he said to me, can I interview you for Neville's book? And I said, yes, that would be fine. And so I got talking to him, and we just started talking books, and I said, look, I've got this novel called The Goldfinches, and I've got, you know, sort of, I've heard you need a literary agent. He said, I'll introduce you to my literary agent, which he did, and that literary agent read that novel and said, well, I don't really think, you know, maybe this is, but have you thought of writing a memoir? And so I said no. So he said, well, you know, I'll kind of give you some pointers as to how to go about it, and that's what happened really. And 18 months later I had a book.
And in your book, you've probably been asked this loads of times, you mentioned that you have dreams about water.
I have dreams about drowning in a 15-foot swimming pool. It's always 15 feet.
Alright. Is this still the case?
That's very Freudian, isn't it?
Is it
still the case?
Do you still have these dreams?
No, I haven't had that dream for a long time. Certainly not since the existence of this band.
Right.
So I think that one's been laid to rest.
Right, well, that is the significance then. That was
Okay.
the next question, was there any significance? And I think since then, obviously, the band's come back together. That was the significance.
Yeah.
You've started writing a novel, which you've already mentioned. How is it coming along?
It's coming along.
It is coming along.
Moving swiftly on.
We sort of know the basic storyline about being a woman giving birth to twins.
That's right, yeah.
One black and one white.
Yeah.
She keeps the white one.
That's the one. You have done your research, haven't you?
Will this story,
Yeah.
and excuse me if it's a bit near the bone, will this story pan out to be a statement against racism?
Well, I think everything we do, everything that Gaps and I do in the Selector, or whatever we do, is, you know, against racism. What other reason is there to belong to a movement like Two Tone, unless that's what you're going to fight day in, day out? You know, that struggle hasn't finished, has it?
No, we were talking about that a few minutes ago, and we're saying that it's got a lot better.
We have to have a reason for being on stage, and the reason for being on stage is, to my mind anyway, you know, counter to all this heritage band nonsense, is not just to make money. I'm not saying that, you know, making money, I mean, you can't do it if you're all poor or you're finding it difficult to make money, but the reason for being on stage is to still engage in that struggle, because until that struggle is gone, then I think that, you know, that's what we have to talk about, and that's what we've been talking about for the past 35 years, but not everybody has been listening.
Just stick on that subject if you don't mind. back in the late 70s, early 80s, racism towards black Caribbeans, especially, I thought was rife.
Well, it didn't really matter what kind of black you were.
No, but
it was just that there were a majority of the black people who were here were from the Caribbean.
If the attitude towards racism today was the norm against racism back then, because we've just stated that it is getting better, do you think you may have had a lot more success?
Us, personally?
Yes, as a band.
Our band or the two-tone movement?
The two-tone movement, shall we
The
say.
two-tone movement. The two-tone movement, I mean, for a small label, right, tiny little label, to have in 1979 3 bands all in the top 10, and to go on to have countless singles that were hits, what other people would consider hits, I think is nothing short of a miracle. It depends on what you measure success by, isn't it? I think you measure success by the fact that here we are 35 years later still talking about it.
Well said. Well, yes, well said. People of my age, teenagers.
He is really young.
I was a teenager back in the 70s.
Right. Lucky you.
People of my age, teenagers back in the 70s, knew what two-tone stood for. Do you think the younger generation of fans today, because I do know that you have got some younger generation.
Yeah, we have, yeah.
Do you think that they are either aware of its meaning, or if they are aware of it, do you think they appreciate the meaning of two-tone?
They probably don't appreciate the meaning of what it meant for what would be grandparents, I guess, now, for when they first came to this country. You know, I mean, they probably don't know that. It's a bit like, yeah, well, my grandmother and my grandfather or whatever, they came here and they worked on the buses or they worked in the NHS and all those things, you know, of why immigration was so paramount at that time. And they probably don't realise that, but I think what they do realise is that there's certainly a struggle going on out there. And you only have to see that with 12 Years a Slave being up for an Oscar at the moment, and all of those kind of things, you know, and that history still needs to be kept alive, because we may well have, and I never thought this, I'm sure the Gaps didn't in our lifetime, that we'd ever see a mixed race President of the United States. Who could have predicted that? You know, when we were doing this back then, Nelson Mandela was still in prison, showed no signs of ever getting out.
No, I didn't.
And you could argue that the two-tone movement, and certainly Jerry Dammers, the founder of that, was actually instrumental in bringing his whole plight to world attention, because nobody else was doing it. The Conservative Party certainly weren't doing it. They were saying you should stay in Robben Island and rock. David Cameron was.
What have we learned, or what can we still learn from that era, which you helped create?
To be more tolerant with individual or people's ideas, and of course you've got to stick to your own idea, not let it put you off, but to be more tolerant to opinions and their sayings,
because we're all human.
Yeah.
How nervous or apprehensive do you and the band get, if at all, when you're touring?
Oh, you always get nervous. I mean, before, this is a 26-day tour, which is quite long, and has a specific idea that we want to go out with, which is like the selector through the ages, through the last 35 years, and you get nervous about, are you choosing the right music? You get, for an audience that is going to come along and see it, is the show interesting enough to people and all of those kind of things. You don't know that until you can sit at home and dream up all these wonderful schemes and then sort of, go and rehearse them and that. But until you actually put it in front of an audience, you don't know, do you?
You don't.
So, I mean, Gloucester Guildhall, which was our first gig, that was sold out, and everyone thought it was really, really brilliant. And Falmouth did, so that's, and Liverpool did last night, so that's 3 down, 23 to go, so we haven't come unstuck yet.
During the 80s, at one point, it seemed you personally, were going to have a very, very successful TV or stroke acting.
Yeah, well, there you go. The stuff that dreams are made of. On that note.
That didn't quite happen. yet. Do you feel that the time spent doing your TV work and your acting work helped in any way the way that you actually now present yourself on stage while performing?
I think that what has to be said about that TV and acting work was that when the particular programme that I presented, Black on Black, was the first of its kind. Right? It was the first of its kind. It was done by London Weekend Television, but it was Channel 4 had an actual remit to have black programmes. We had a sister programme called Eastern Eye. They didn't even have us on weekly, they had us on fortnightly. So they had black people on one week and they had Asian people on the next week. And you weren't just talking to a particular demographic, you were talking to every single black person, irrespective of whether they came from African countries or whether they came from the Caribbean or they were black Americans or whatever. You were talking to all those people all at once. Now that's ridiculous. No programme ever does that. No programme ever does that. So for an actual programme that started off from nothing, wasn't necessarily going to please every black person in this country, which it didn't, and it was the first of its kind. That was like pioneering sort of unknown territory. I mean, at times it was like climbing Everest in terms of trying to please people who weren't very pleased. So to have been in that vanguard of those presenters that were doing that, I can only say that was absolutely great, because you felt as though you were making a difference. The only reason why black people got that programme right was because of the riots that happened in the early 80s. It's the only reason why they got it. Every single thing that any person of colour anywhere in the world gets, right, is because there was a struggle. There was a struggle to actually, get some recognition and to get some time actually on the television. Now when you look at MTV, right, it's kind of wall-to-wall black people, which is really great. But in our day, I mean, in 1980, 81, the only black person that was ever on it was Michael Jackson. And look at what happened to him, poor soul. He ended up looking white to all intents and purposes, didn't he?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And I mean, I know that lots of black people at that time had kind of, reconstructive plastic surgery and things like that to make themselves look whiter, to make themselves look more reasonable, for white folks to listen, to look at them and listen to them. That is outrageous, absolutely outrageous. I mean, you just don't get